Hey, Ryan. Up next, we have our dear friend Stève with the Straight from Engineering segment.
Yeah, I've been really looking forward to this segment. Stève is a principal architect here at Cisco. Of course, everybody, if you've ever been in the DevNet zone, you probably have met Stève. He is the technical lead for our API experience and API style guide initiatives. Really looking forward because Stève's going to be talking to some really interesting people here at Cisco. Stève, welcome.
Hi, and welcome everybody. We have a brand new track this year for DevNet Create. It's straight from engineering. It's one-on-one conversations, interviews we have with engineering leads. We're starting with Sanjeev and Vijoy. They are part of this new group, Emerging Technologies and Innovation. They are driving the strategy, the research, and how we're investing not only in technology but also standards. So pretty important conversations and for the Cisco's roadmap towards APIs. Christopher has been in the Kubernetes ecosystem forever. He joined Cisco recently and is now driving a lot of the work regarding GitOps and how we can influence and bring new technologies in the Kubernetes ecosystem. Adam and Martin are part of the Webex group. They are working on SDKs, but also the JavaScript runtime that is shipped with all devices worldwide, these Webex devices. And finally, Cory is not only architect, he's also PM, managing the set of Meraki APIs. And he will share some of his tips also and the best tool sets. So we are going to learn directly from engineering, building the products at Cisco. And yeah, I would say let's start and go with the interview. Hi, and welcome to Straight from Engineering. I'm with Sanjeev and Vijoy from Cisco Emerging Technology and Incubation Group. And please, Sanjeev and Vijoy, would you introduce yourself?
Good morning, Steve. Thank you for having us. And I'm currently the Vice President of Emerging Technologies and Incubation Group. And my responsibilities around product operations based out of San Jose, California. As ET&I's charter is to advance the next big bets as well as the moonshots, my team's responsibility is for sourcing, generating, and kind of screening new ideas which we can go and incubate and which can find Cisco's growth for next many years to come.
Hi, folks. So I'm also from ET&I. I'm the Vice President of Engineering, also based in San Jose, where the fires are no longer burning, which is a good thing. And my responsibility within ET&I is to run a couple of things. First is the engineering behind the ventures that Sanjeev just mentioned. There is a Cisco Innovation Center, which is now changing its name to Cisco Innovation Labs. So it's becoming bigger and better. And that's the second leg. And the third bit is to work with universities and faculty and academia for directed research in the areas where we want these bold bets and ventures to happen within Cisco.
Wow. So we're lucky to have you, and tons of questions are coming. Let's start and dig into these opportunities and strategies you're working on and how you see the future of both technology and Cisco, where we're heading to. I would start with Sanjeev. You've been in technology forever. You got your CCI by 98. You've been having a lot of many different positions at Cisco. You've been in the engineering groups, portfolio management. You've been in cloud switching business. So it's just like, all areas of Cisco's business. I'm wondering, how do you see the future, the growth, and also how Cisco has been tackling software, programmability over the years? You've been seeing this growth. How do you see it now and in the coming years?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I think, as you mentioned, I've been in the industry for a little over 2 decades and have been working in different areas. One of the things I would say is, software programmability has been an inherent part of Cisco all along. Ever since we started our company, when we were bringing out our routers and switches and so forth, software has been a key component of that. Over the years, if you see the growth of the company and how we are, all we are changing is how that piece gets consumed by the customers. So over the last few years, we have been really focused on changing the stack and how we can basically move from an infrastructure to an application layer and so forth, and how we make our infrastructure more programmable. Programmability, when you start talking about network programmability and as it becomes more ubiquitous, one of the things and this is what excites me the most, by the way, talking to this community, because working with the DevNet community and how they have leveraged that underlying resources or the infrastructure and how to program that, which was not feasible, a few years back. But, that has immensely changed the landscape, and the possibilities for tomorrow is limitless. Just giving you an example of, think about the new specialist certification and training that DevNet has brought around programmability. I wish it was there when I did my CCIE 20 years back. It's phenomenal. So the future is limitless, and how Cisco is shaping, because we become that bridge between what was there yesterday and what's there to come. And I think we are in a phenomenal place and want to work with this community to take it to that and be that bridge.
I'm so glad we have you in that position of driving the future of Cisco and seeing where we need to invest. Because of course software counts is a lot for us. We created these DevNet certifications about programmability just to make sure our community could be valued for their investments, and all the work you'll be doing, we really want to reintegrate it into the developer program, and how we run it. It's gonna be a real adventure. I can't wait to see the next steps of this. What's interesting also when I met with you was like, Vijoy, on your end, you've got a very different profile. Many years of experience, but working at external companies. You've been to Nortel, IBM, Google, and you joined Cisco more recently. And from there, you've got to bring a different perspective. Certainly, you come with another background. And I was wondering, for community, how do you see maybe innovation and opportunities that are being brought currently?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I think to latch on to some things that Sanjeev was mentioning earlier, if you think about it, application experience is the new brand. And who creates an application experience is the developer community. And so developers are definitely the key to the future. And if you think about our journey as Cisco, or even infrastructure or networking in general as an industry, yes, we had software within the box. We have software which is outside the box, whether it's SDN, whether it's intent-based networking. And we are talking about infrastructure as code. Who drives infrastructure as code? Is the developer community. And if you think about where things are headed next, it's an application-first infrastructure where application developers are defining what is needed, and that is percolated all the way down. So whether it's the logic of the application, the infrastructure needs, the policy needs, the security needs, all of those things are defined in one place, and those things are programmatically pushed throughout the infrastructure. And again, who can drive this future? It's the developer community, the DevNet community. So where is the innovation happening? It's happening in that application-first infrastructure. It's happening with the developer community.
Awesome. So we're delighted to have you add there. And for us developers and the whole community, standards, they count a lot, because we want to leverage skills. We want to reuse our skills across the board. We want to switch easily from one technical or vendor to another. But also we want to invest on our future and evolve in our career. So standards, I know your group is, I think, now taking a big part of that effort across Cisco, right?
Yeah, so I think standards are critically important for the industry, the community, and for Cisco, of course. We are rethinking how we approach standards. Alyssa from our team, ET and I, is actually building this global standards team. She's working with all the BUs and the BU leads like Jonathan, Todd, Jitu, to figure out what makes sense from the Cisco perspective to go and push standards, to involve the community, to make sure that there's interoperability, that things are not siloed and are vendor specific. They need to benefit the community in general, and they need to be powered by where the technology is headed, where the industry is headed. So there's a lot of thought behind it, and there needs to be a pretty well thought out process behind it. And Alyssa is actually taking charge to make sure that that's happening. But standards, I mean, typically as Cisco, we've thought of standards as the IETFs, the IEEEs, I mean, so those things. But what is also becoming extremely, extremely important is the open source community. And whether you call it standards, whether you call it a community, it's still the question of interoperability, is still a question of transparency. It's a question of having the right governance models. All of those things still apply. And at Cisco, we've been pretty deep into some open source forums or communities. We've chartered a couple of projects in Linux Foundation for Networking. We were pretty significant players in Open Daylight, in FIDO, which is a data plane forwarder. We are the founding members of CNCF, which is the Cloud Native Computing Forum. And we have a couple of projects there that we are either pushing with the community there or participating in some communities that are already there. We just joined as a founding member for in the Linux Foundation for Public Health. So that's a new forum that just got launched, which has to do with the tracing and the data access around tracing and contact tracing, as well as the health benefits of trying to get all of these different communities together, like healthcare, like like pharmacy companies, pharma companies, like infrastructure providers like us. So bringing them to a common point, bringing them to a common set of infrastructures for public health, for the benefit of public health. So we've been pretty involved in all of these communities. More is coming, but standards and open source definitely big parts of our forward-looking strategy.
And I may just add a few things to what Vijoy just outlined. And if I look, Steve, from a purely strategic point of view as well, and purely customer lens point of view, Cisco has been a customer-driven company. Even this DevNet community, a lot of our partners, customers, they participate because we want to take this to the new level. And any standard organization or a community, when you start talking about, there are a few fundamental things they look at, right? I mean, and some of the things Vijoy already touched upon is like, hey, we want to make sure that it is open. Okay, we don't want any vendor lock-in. We don't want to make sure that we are not stuck in a proprietary solutions. And we want to ensure that we have the flexibility and building blocks to achieve our end outcome as we want to. If you keep that in perspective from that lens, standards, open source community has always been striving to drive towards that end customer results. And Cisco has been championing that, ever since I have known, whether it was the first initial protocols which we started standardizing with IETF, or even like Vijoy touched upon of what we have been contributing to the open source community, because that's the fundamental piece of Cisco's culture on how we are a customer-driven community, because majority of the way we think the way we build and incubate and go after what we are bringing is driven by customers in our partner community. And this community plays a key role into helping us getting to that new level. One of the things I will touch upon is, Vijoy mentioned about our engagement with CNCF and so forth. Some of the key incubation ventures we are doing right now is kind of based on some of those open source standards, because it's not just that we want to, not only we want to contribute, but we also want to leverage that and bring in the additional community to take part into it so that we can make it for the greater good for the society as well as for the customers who are looking for such solutions.
Yeah, if I may jump in here, just to add to that as well, I think going back to the developer community that we are talking to, if you think about where the developer community is bringing the most impact, it's through open source. And just like Sanjeev was saying, we are a big consumer of open source. If you think about all of the SaaS products that we have out there, they are big consumers of open source. And we are big producers to open source as well. And you will see a lot more of that as we walk through some of our ventures in the coming few months. But the open source community is also equal to the developer community. And that's something, that relationship is going to be stronger and stronger moving forward.
And that's something we also started early at DevNet. We've got Code Exchange, this platform that also simplifies, facilitates all the exchange of code across our community members so that they can be just like facilitating. And that's also part of open source. It's consuming, but also the exchange of all these codes. And we have several speakers coming after you in this straight from engineering segment with Webex and Kubernetes that will disclose also some of their work that has been also been pushed as open source modules available to the community. So thanks. Okay, we've got a limited amount of time, so I would love to stay for the whole day with you. You've got a lot to share. Maybe before we leave, how can we continue the conversation? The Emerging Technology and Incubation Group is being assembled. It's working already full speed. What are the next steps? How can we connect together? Any ideas?
Absolutely, Steve. As you may have heard, both Vijoy and I have been talking about, this community is such an integral part of our future growth, as you may have just heard. We want to make sure that we engage with this community. This ties goes even further, and we are opening up what we call it as listening forums with this community, and we want this community to participate, both emerging technologies and with Cisco DevNet. We want to make sure that we listen to this community. We want them to participate. We have a lot of, I touched upon some of the new innovation ideas coming through and what we may go incubate. As Vijoy mentioned, we also have co-innovation labs and so forth. So if we all work together as a community, we want to listen in. Who knows where the next moonshot or big idea would come through, and we want to foster this partnership. This is just the beginning.
Yeah, just to quickly add to that, so Sanjeev mentioned the innovation labs. The innovation labs are already using the DevNet platform as the means to engagement with the developer community. We will be expanding that to include some of these newer platforms, these newer ventures that we are working on, which are specific to developers. And we would want developers to come in, engage in sandboxes, co-innovate, whether you are building around us, on top of us, with us. I mean, all of those forums are excellent ways of engaging, but stay tuned for that, more coming on that one.
Okay, so be ready on your end too, because that community is pretty creative and it's got a lot of ideas to share. So thanks for listening and thanks for being with us today also. And I can't wait to see you again in future conversations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Hi, and welcome to Straight from Engineering. I'm with Christopher from Cisco Data Center Networks. And Christopher, may you introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Christopher LiljenstolpeChief. I am the Chief Architect for Cloud in the Data Center Networks business unit here at Cisco. And prior to being here at Cisco, I was the co-founder, the creator of Project Calico and the co-founder of Tigera, which is the company that's built around Project Calico. So, and prior to that, I've done lots of things. I've been chief architect at a couple large service providers. I've chaired IETF working groups. I've been actively involved in the CNCF and around networking, obviously, and other things. Built a couple of big compute clusters in my life for things like biocompute and bioinformatics. A couple other startups, and ran networking in the Antarctic for 2 years for the U.S. research program there. So, sort of been around quite a bit for probably more years than I care to count in the industry.
Awesome. I know you've been investing a lot of your time over the last 6-8 years on Kubernetes, and you were pioneering there when you started Project Calico, Tigera. We know that now, today, the Kubernetes platform is an infrastructure which is strategic for a lot of businesses, and it's really a key component. From your experience, I'm interested to understand which opportunities you may see for someone that is jumping, or maybe some challenges for companies already using Kubernetes.
Sure. So, I think, Kubernetes as it picks up more of a load and is being adapted to more use cases than it was originally designed or conceived for, is becoming more complex. And so there is just generally the complexity of Kubernetes, but at the same time, that's not my biggest concern. And part of that just because of the way Kubernetes is architected. Kubernetes is fairly loosely coupled in a lot of ways. So it's more of a Linux or Unix kind of architecture where you have individual components that are responsible for well-defined things, and those are loosely coupled. So it's not as big and hairy a mess as other orchestration systems have been in the past. The biggest problems I've seen actually when I've been helping companies go through this transition to Kubernetes or transition to cloud native, as much as I hate that particular term, is really been more around structure. A lot of organizations still are very siloed. They have storage silos, and they have compute silos, and they have networking silos, and they have database silos, and they have all these different silos. And in a world of microservices, all those silos and undifferentiated infrastructure underneath it, or infrastructure is becoming undifferentiated. All of those silos actually end up creating impedance problems for getting an overall cloud infrastructure built or run or continue, right? So that's continue to operate. So that's one, is corporate silos are a problem. Or corporate organizational, sort of the same view. There's, a lot of corporations have followed a very waterfall kind of approach, where you go from dev to QA to operations, et cetera, for the applications. That doesn't really work in this new design model we're in. It'd be called agile, call it whatever you want. So there's even a dev organizational mismatch. I think also there's a difference between the technology and the philosophy. So I think the philosophy of what we're trying to do is being driven by changes that enterprises see is necessary. So enterprises want to be fast and agile. They want to get, every enterprise is becoming to a certain degree a software-driven enterprise or a software-based enterprise. So you start taking on the characteristics of a software organization. Faster cycle times. You don't want to do 18-month waterfall designs. You want to do something that's quick and easy to turn around, easy to react to changes in the marketplace. So that's the philosophy. That's the way organizations want to be. the technology they've deployed, and again, these structures, et cetera, argue against that. There's an impedance mismatch there. So if you think about, I think that's really where most of the challenges have really been. It's been, how do you get the organization to reflect the philosophy of where you want to go? You know, it's hard to do a agile methodology if the underlying infrastructure, teams, or the controls you put around application delivery are still very waterfall in approach, or very sequential in passing tickets to get things done, and they go from queue to queue to queue. So I think that's been primarily the issues I've seen helping customers bring up Kubernetes and adopt this model. It's not getting the technology working, that's part of it, but it's more around how do they refactor their organization to be able to behave in this way. So it's all layer 8, layer 9, which is the area that we technologists absolutely hate to deal with, but it's necessary. We've got to deal with the layer 8, layer 9 in order to make this work. All the great technology in the world is not going to solve this problem.
Yeah, and definitely agile means a lot for a company, for a business. It's just not that easy in software, and that transition. I'm curious, you've been just like in these projects, cloud-driven Kubernetes, where Kubernetes is really a core piece of these infrastructures. How do you see like applying agile to Kubernetes, using maybe the tooling that developers use traditionally, that like Git, their traditional toolings? So how do you manage to make these works together?
So I think this is an interesting one. So obviously, where Kubernetes came out of is very much a software control system, a Git type environment. The interesting thing when you look at initially at Kubernetes, there is a lot of CLI driven things right now that still have immediate impact. So for example, you can say it's easy to do Kubernetes in a GitOps driven environment, but it's not the only way of doing it, right? You can either take your YAML file that describes a deployment you want, et cetera, and you can check it in through Git, and a CI/CD chain will fire off. And at the end of the day, that YAML file will get fed to the Kubernetes API server, and your deployment will magically happen, or at least what you told the system to do will magically happen. It may or may not be what you intended, but that's, automation of mistakes is just a faster way of delivering mistakes. But there's also the direct command line drive of Kubernetes. So that's you do a kubectl, and that's a big religious argument. Is kubectl, is it kube control? Is it? But anyway, kubectl, kubectl apply, kubectl create. Those are writes directly into the API server, and at that point, it's a very for people who are used to CLIs and immediate action, like on a Linux server, that makes a lot of sense. One of the issues that has, though, is you no longer have an idempotent necessarily infrastructure, because I don't necessarily have a record of all those YAML objects. I can't go back and recreate the infrastructure at this point in time. I can back up at CD and recover maybe that way, but backing up a database is always sort of interesting as well. So if you think about one of the requirements, at least the way I think of it, of these big, very dynamic environments, is that we need to have them be idempotent. If something goes wrong, I need to be able to return to the last known good state. To have them be idempotent, it's a lot easier to do that if I've got all the steps that got me there recorded in order in someplace like a Git repo. So I think if you're serious about this, you do want to adopt a GitOps model for Kubernetes. And you can do that by just turning off kubectl, kubectl API rights or direct access to APIs, API rights. Some people are still used to kubectl, though they still want to interact that way. So one of the things we're working on here at Cisco is there a way to slide a GitOps workflow into into a kubectl workflow? Is there a way that even if somebody's doing kubectl writes, can we still direct that into a GitOps workflow without replacing kubectl, wrapping it, etc.? And the reason you don't want to do that is every developer can have kubectl on their laptop. Do I want to go around and put a wrapper on every single person's machine? Probably not. So this is one of the areas that we're actually looking at right now is, can we take the folks who really want to do kubectl writes, can we still take that, make it behave just like they expect, but in the back end, use that to drive a GitOps approach? So that's one of the things we're working on here. It's still sort of in a research phase, but I guess the key takeaway for us is, if you are serious about this model, just like the code you're applying into Kubernetes, the configs you're using to configure your switches and your routers and your storage and everything else, the way you interact with Kubernetes itself should also be a Git-driven infrastructure, or something very akin to a GitOps-driven infrastructure, rather than an immediate API change via API or CLI tools. So that's at least my view on this.
I want it. I think our developer community is very into Git. Automation, being able to manage a state, reliability, just like that's the way you scale your infrastructure, but you deliver reliably, and you secure these infrastructures, these critical infrastructures. So we have a lot of courses at DevNet, and we started early, training our community to use Git, and we've got several courses and certifications covering DevOps, SecOps, and Git is very central. So yeah, that really, I think, rings a bell for a lot of our community members, how to best make this work together. I'm curious here. Kubernetes is just like a de facto standard to us. So maybe it's already solved there. Maybe there's already options. Or do you think it's more something that needs still to happen and to be investigated, because there's no real option yet really established?
So I guess to rephrase your question, has Kubernetes solved all the problems, or is there still work to be done, or maybe an evolution eventually beyond Kubernetes? This industry has a habit of never standing still, and we like to fiddle with things. So, is Kubernetes the natural endpoint? I think it's really good, but probably it's not the natural endpoint. I think what is more interesting in this regard is the way that Kubernetes has abstracted and describes resource requirements, deployment requirements, etc. We can argue if YAML is the right tool or not, because everyone likes arguing about data description or configuration description languages. But is the way that Kubernetes models things, is that getting probably reasonably close to a functionally good endpoint? I think probably yes. So do I expect to see a whole different philosophy emerge? Not for quite some time. Is it Kubernetes, or is it something else eventually that's consuming these models? That's a natural evolution that will happen. But when I think about just the way Kubernetes has loosely coupled all these things together and the way it models the abstractions that are necessary, I think it's getting closer to the optimal solution. So I don't think, and if you keep the models the same, then if it's a different consumer of that model, that's not as big an impact, right? What is really disruptive is the overall model, the way you look at and envision and and characterize the infrastructure in the application. If that goes through a major change, then that's disruptive, right? So if I go from thinking about networks as network entities like a VLAN, a router, a firewall, etc., to thinking to characterize, and that's the way OpenStack did it. That's the way everything up to this date has pretty much done it. They thought about networking as networking components, i.e., as way network engineers think about it. Kubernetes tends to think about it more as what is the application requirement that's necessary. I need to be able to load balance stuff coming into my service. I don't care how you do it, or I need to provide some protection to only allow certain kinds of traffic in. Again, I don't say how you do that. I just say this is the kind of protections I need. That change is a sea change. It's disruptive. But if we say that I am going to have something different process this CNI description or this network policy description, that's not as disruptive, because at the end of the day, the artifacts we've created, the descriptions, the way we think about this and model this haven't changed. It's just the renderer that changes. So for me, the interest isn't so much is it cube or something else rendering it. My bigger thinking here is the model going to substantially change again? Are we going to completely change the way we model these components and these applications, or not? And I think that we're getting closer, like I said, to a reasonable endpoint, and probably closer than we've been in forever in this industry. So I don't know if that answered the question, but models win.
That did.
Renderers are secondary. And if you get the model right, the API and the thing almost writes itself. The first thing you got to get right is the model. I think we're pretty close to being right on the model now. And I'll eat those words in 5 years when somebody proves me wrong, but I'll stay by them for right now.
Got your point on the vision, the long-term vision, and just like that's your role at Cisco to help and to support and to drive the work there. You spoke about models, and a lot of our community are keep learning. I was wondering, it's central to your work. You need to communicate your ideas to different groups. What is the tool beds you're using? Your favorite maybe principles? What is your foundation? So that we could pick a bit of your secrets of how you organize, because we know it's a challenge.
Sure. So I guess from an architectural standpoint, there's a couple really simple rules, and this goes to am I looking to tip over a whole way of thinking things like Calico, or is it just I'm doing the next version of a service for a service provider? And these don't really sound all that technical, but they definitely help you make the technical decisions. One of mine is what I refer to as Christopher's 3 o'clock in the morning rule, 3 a.m. rule. If the solution you're coming up with is so, as an architect, usually I'm the last one on the pager duty escalation list, right? If it gets to the point where it seems to be an actual design problem, it's the architects that get called out, right? It's not just a device failed, etc. So my 3 o'clock in the morning rule is I no longer like being woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning. So if the solution is complex enough that it is likely that I will get called at 3 o'clock in the morning to help figure out what's going on, then we probably haven't gotten the solution right. It's easy to make a very complex thing. It's sort of hard to make something that is and elegant to make something that is complex easy. So in my rule, if I look at this and figure out I got to write 20 pages of troubleshooting documents as to how you troubleshoot this at 3 o'clock in the morning, because that's when things break, I probably am not done yet. We probably need to go back and figure out how to refactor this and make the individual components simpler. That goes to, again, a KISS principle. Another one I usually laughingly refer to is if it takes more than half a kilogram of RFCs to do something, I'm probably doing it wrong. If I literally if I print them out and I put them on a scale and it's weighing half a kilo, we're probably doing it wrong. If it takes you more than 10 minutes to sketch out a major functional blocks day in the life kind of diagram and describe it, again, you're probably doing things wrong. So at things at scale, do not tightly couple them. Loosely couple them if you have to couple them at all, or maybe they just start flying in loose formation. Try and devolve things into reasonable functional components that can stand on their own. So when I look at, for example, Calico, every major component in Calico you can describe in about 5 minutes doing a diddle whiteboard. That when you're doing things at scale, there's enough complexity there. Having the underlying components being complex as well dramatically complicates your life. So, and that also goes to something where I see a lot of enterprises and a lot of standards bodies make this mistake. They try and design for the 100% use case. Or as I say it sometimes, they try and design for the zebras, not the horses. It's a reference to a medical school joke. But if you design for the 100% case, probably 80 to 90% of the work is that last 5 to 10%. And you will probably spend almost no time actually consuming that, but you've definitely made your environment much more complex. So you design for the majority use case. If I've got a few VMs and a whole bunch of containers, and I'm mainly a container first organization, I got a few VMs. Do you design your orchestrator around VMs? Or do you design your orchestrator around around containers, and the handle of VMs is the exception? There are a lot of enterprises out there today who are still designing, thinking they're going to be mainly containers, but they're still designing around a VM model because they still have some VMs. And you at some point need to say, why am I designing for what's eventually going to be a corner case? Let's design for the majority and then figure out how we deal with the corner cases, rather than trying to come up with a grand unification theory that will handle everything equally. You just aren't going to get there, right? So design for your majority use case. And as things are moving in this cloud application deployment development model anyway, that will probably be your 95% use case, right? And then it's fairly easy to come up with how do I deal with these remaining things? And the way you deal with that might be technological, it might be organizational, might be financial, but don't try and design such that you will be the thing that will solve all problems equally well, because you will solve no problems well, or you'll solve them all badly. So that's the other one. Don't go for that 100%. Go for the good enough, not the all singing, all dancing.
So thanks for giving us 100% of your time for this interview for once, and not 80% of you or 70. So it's a lot of experience. Thanks for sharing it today. And we look forward to keep engaging with you, seeing the work of your team coming out in the coming weeks, months, years. We've got a bunch of resources at Cisco with developer blogs. We hope to see you speaking when you want to share with the community. Don't know if you have any final words you wanna share today.
I guess given the amount of work we do here in DevNet around things like Git models, etc., when we finally think we've cracked and have something to show for GitOps enabling kubectl writes, we'll definitely come back and give you guys a bit of a demo.
Awesome. Can't wait. So take your time, have a great day. Thanks for being here with us today, and
thank you for inviting me to talk.
At Cisco.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to talk. It's been fun.
Hi, welcome to Straight from Engineering. We are with Adam Weeks. He's a technical lead in the Webex Engineering group. And Adam, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Adam Weeks, and like Steph said, that I am a technical leader for the Webex for Developers program, working on Webex integrations with third-party developers. I've been with Cisco this now my 5th year, and happy to be in the JavaScript ecosystem, and as well as some of the open source technologies.
Yeah, so Adam, in 5 years at Cisco, you've been working on numerous, multiple, and pretty critical projects, and people don't really know you because you're behind the keyboard and the screens, and you're doing the work in the engineering team. You've been working on the Webex, React widgets, and JavaScript SDKs for Webex. The pretty advanced technologies also for Webex meetings that help developers interact with Webex. I'm curious about what do you think are your biggest achievements on the way, about what you've been accomplishing and that you're really proud of?
Yeah, well, just getting started with Cisco, we were brought in and started working on the Webex widgets system, which is a way to embed the Webex Teams and meetings experience within an existing website. We started off doing it with just Salesforce, but we built it in a way that anyone could pick it up and start using it. And it's been really exciting to see all these developers and technologies emerge from the technologies that we were building and getting them out to developers. We also have the JavaScript SDK that's a little bit lower level that you can work with, diving into some of the teams and meetings experiences within Webex. We just recently, last year, released an Office add-in that allows you to have the Webex experience from within Microsoft Office. We also, some of the customers that we're excited about, we've got a robotics company that's using our meetings technology to power a robot that roams an office and gives you a virtual view into your office for remote workers. We also have we've been working with the New York Workers' Comp Board to get the workers' comp cases done remotely via Webex instead of having to have someone that may have injured themselves on the job and having to go down to the courthouse and talk to a judge about something with their workers' comp. They can use the Webex platform to do that all remotely and a lot easier on the users. And then the biggest thing that's going on right now that I'm excited about is all of our integrations within telehealth. So we know that everyone's trying to lock down in this COVID state that we're in and trying not to get out as much as possible and not have to crowd large waiting rooms, and being able to enable that technology for users to be able to just pull up their phone or their computer and talk to a doctor virtually without having to go and possibly expose themselves or expose others if they are sick. It's really exciting times.
Yeah, so as I said in the introduction, you've been busy all this time, but what's important is that for people who don't really know you, you are the technical leader, you are a JavaScript developer yourself. So you're leading a team, you're helping this team move forward, you're committing code on your everyday basis. Okay, that's your job. And you spoke at .js in 2018, that was 2 years ago. And I was wondering as a JavaScript developer, if there's any technology or tool that are more important to you that really matter. We know that in your JavaScript community at Cisco, we have many developers that are starting or some other that are very advanced with JavaScript. The thing you're doing with WebRTC and other technologies are just awesome. So what would be the tools you would bring with you if you had to go to an island with, maybe you would have Wi-Fi access and internet access, but what would be the 2 or 3 tools you would bring or technologies with you?
So yeah, I live basically all day in my code editor, and my editor of choice is the Visual Studio Code from Microsoft. It's actually a JavaScript powered code editor, so I'm writing JavaScript in an editor that was written in JavaScript. So it's pretty neat, and you can, if you want to expand on it, you can dive into the code base and actually make your own changes in JavaScript. The other thing that I find myself constantly using is a tool called Dash that it's a offline documentation search tool. So it will pull down a lot of the different documentations. So I have like the React documentation. You can even pull down from Mozilla the HTML and JavaScript libraries, and it gives you a nice index search, and it makes it so I don't have to keep things at the top of my head, and I can really quickly just dive in to see what the function methods are, because there's just so many things, and bouncing around between the different technologies. I find myself looking up more than I used to when I was a younger developer.
Awesome. On the project you've been working on, I know it's a lot of innovation and incubation you're also driving before this goes and ships as a ready-to-use, production-ready framework in JavaScript. Were there any challenges that you met on the way, and you think that are still here in the industry? Like, you keep facing them, and it's like repeating yourself and say, at one point we need to solve this challenge because it comes over and over again, in my experience as a developer.
Yeah, so whenever you say challenge right now, the biggest thing in my head is WebRTC. So we use the WebRTC stack to enable our meetings on the web without having to install any sort of plugins. And that's a standard that's still growing, and it's all based on the browsers to implement that standard. And so as the browsers get released, there's new versions of the standard that they're meeting and new features that they're adding. And so it's a constant chase and trying to keep up and stay ahead of changes, and making sure that one implementation for Firefox on the Mac, it may not be the same as the implementation on Edge on Windows. So it's a lot of keeping up and making sure that that what you have is working properly. And we're doing a lot of things with automated tests and testing frameworks to make sure that these changes don't come in and break the user experience for our users. But then we also still staying modern and being able to use some of the new things that come out within the standard.
Just for you to know, we really appreciate in the Cisco community all the time you're spending there, because just like we pick your code, you drop the latest version, everything is managed in an open source mode, so anybody can get there. You can get a lot of all the code, and you can even fix it and push pull requests. And so so much work, but it's really interesting that without any WebRTC skills, video, and any background in that area, you can still create very easily an experience in your app with web technologies and meetings and video and calls and media sharing and audio. So specific requirements. So that's an incredible work. So thanks for that and all the care you put on it. Is there any other challenge that maybe just like still coming to your head? I would love the group and the community to just be helping solving some of the challenge, and knowing that sometimes maybe if someone faces a difficulty, maybe they're not alone, maybe there's someone else, and maybe it's more not on them. It's not a learning curve. It's more just like where the industry stands right now.
Yeah, and that's true. And I think one of the big challenges we have now is trying to decide what the experience is like from within the WebRTC and WebEx meetings. we want to make sure that we're trying to do this fine balancing line of, how much customizability do we want to give our end users versus, we want to make sure that all of our WebEx users have the greatest experience possible and give them the true WebEx experience. And so that's where we're really trying to find a challenge and trying to find that balance there.
Okay, so please keep the work going. We were really happy to have you today. Are there any other considerations you want to share with the team? I know you're speaking sometimes in the Cisco Live DevNet zone. You've been also speaking at developer conferences around the world. So yeah, anything else you want to share with the community, or personal projects you may be willing to share? It's pretty open question.
Yeah, like my talk at .js, I'm a big proponent of the developer tools that the browsers give us for JavaScript engineers, and a lot of us, I know a lot of JavaScript engineers, we just try to just do it as quickly as possible and get the code out, because that's the nature of JavaScript. But there, Google Chrome and Firefox, the developer tools, taking some time to dive into those and reading about them and seeing what all the powerful tools that they have. I come from I was in Objective-C and Java before that. So, I have a history of, compiled languages and being able to, really dive in using a debugger where, if for some, a lot of web engineers, it's just, we just throwing the code at the browser and seeing what works and, logging out to your console. But, they do have tools that allow us to do debugging. You can step through your code. You can dive in. You can log things out in a different manner. It's really exciting when you dive into the developer tool to see how much better it makes you as an engineer and understanding what your code is doing. And so I'm always a big proponent of diving into those developer tools.
Oh, thanks. Very inspiring. And I hope to see you again soon at an event or speaking. We have a lot of virtual sessions coming. So I know you've been speaking around, and and you will present the latest features, of course, of the Webex SDKs.
Oh, yes.
Thanks. Have a good day.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Hi, and welcome everyone to Straight from Cisco Engineering. I'm with Martin. Martin is a software engineer on our Cisco collaboration team working on video devices and meetings, and specifically the programmability for these devices. So please, Martin, introduce yourself.
Well, thanks for having me, Stève. Yes, I'm Martin. I work mostly on our collaboration devices, and starting to suddenly I've turned into this veteran of 8 years. The time has literally flown past. I had a really brief after my studies here in Oslo. I actually worked for Opera Software, and then I've been straight with Cisco for eight years now. And what I'm mostly doing is working with our devices, our APIs, their extensibility, and we'll probably get more into this exactly what we're doing later on.
So as part of the DevNet group, we've been having a lot of conversations together about the APIs you're working with, and specifically JavaScript. I'm wondering, along those years, what do you think would be your biggest achievements? What are you the most proud of from everything delivered there?
Yeah, so as I said, my team's primary responsibility over the years have been to make sure that our devices provide good developer experiences for ourselves and also for third parties by exposing APIs and tools to make it easier to integrate our devices into more advanced rooms, make customized experiences and these kind of things. So I would say that with that in mind, quite some years ago now, actually, we started thinking about ways to make our devices more programmable. And being a scripting guy with background in Python and JavaScript and working with the web and these kind of technologies, it seemed sensible that JavaScript was a pretty good fit to work with this sort of event-driven nature that we have on our devices. So we started actually incorporating a JavaScript runtime natively on the devices, which lets users write plain JavaScript code, which then can listen using the APIs of the device on certain states and trigger certain behaviors when things happen. And also then combining this with extensibility on our own native UIs, we can provide the tools you need to make proper custom experiences on top of the Cisco Room devices, except that it's actually your own. It's something you have created yourself, which then fits perfectly into your own environment. And so this whole package we have these user interface extensions, which provide you the buttons. And then we also have the macro system, which is the JavaScript runtime, basically. So the JavaScript runtime, it consists of a embedded interpreter called duct tape. It's open source, and we use it instead of V8 or Node.js for its low memory footprints on the embedded devices, which they don't really have the computing power as your regular computer. So we had to make some choices there. And then we also provide some editing tools to let you write the JavaScript code which is supposed to run on the device, and how to, copy over your code to store it. And we also have to provide some APIs which lets you actually, or some JavaScript library which lets you interact with the APIs. So this whole package is, sort of proud to say that it's mainly me being the primary contributor on that part. So I feel like it's a pretty substantial piece of work, that a lot of people seem to be getting a lot of, pleasure from.
I would agree. When I joined the group and discovered this macro runtime, it's pretty impressive that it's running on hundreds of thousands of Cisco collaboration devices deployed at companies, and it's a huge opportunity for developer community. So as a JavaScript developer myself, I was straight away fascinated by this runtime. So thanks for taking the time with your team to really work on the details and shipping it all over all devices. Maybe to make it more concrete, you'd like to go, can you do a demo just to show the group how that works?
Yeah, so we could probably have a quick look at the user-facing part of this, how you would use the editor, and basically the JavaScript that you're faced with when you want to develop such an experience. So I'll just start sharing my screen, and we could just have a quick run through of how this works in practice. All right, so here you see me in what we talked about, this editing environment for these macros. And we also have a preview of my room device user interface here on the right. So we'll just use that to see some of the effects that we're getting when we're changing this JavaScript code here. So in short, we let users create new files or macros on the device. You give it a name, like macro 2, because I already had a macro 1. And yeah, that's pretty much it. It's saved. And then we'll go with the one I already had there called macro. So what you're actually interfacing with is this small open source JavaScript library called the JSX API. And as long as you do this import, you will have that available in your macro. And I'm not going to go dive into exactly what this code is doing, but it's pretty silly. It's just basically incrementally increasing the volume of the device. And once it hits this threshold of 70, it's just going to say, no, this is too loud, I'm going to mute you. And then it all goes around again once more, and then keeps on going like that forever. It's just a silly little demo to show that we can actually change physical properties of the device, provide users with alerts and messages, and all from this tiny programming environment, so to speak. So what we'll do is we'll actually enable the code running here by invoking this main function. And when I save this, it automatically applies to the device and it starts running. So here already the volume was too loud, so it started muting me. And now you can see here from the preview that the volume bar is increasing, and then, oh, hits the threshold, and then it's muted again, and it continues and continues because this is an infinite loop. So if I mute this or remove and comment out that line again and save, this behavior is going to stop. And now you can see that the volume is static, but you could also use this to do other things like starting your presentation from the device just using code. Or do like a single fire and forget of a single command that you always have to run or something like that. So as I said, I won't dive deep into this, but it hopefully shows the power of the macro runtime and what you can actually do with it. So check it out on DevNet. It's definitely worth a look.
Wow, it really helps seeing the thing in practice, honestly, and all this interactivity you're getting with intelligence, getting instant feedback about what's going on a real-world device. But not only the macro runtime, but also the environment, the coding environment is pretty impressive. So yeah, that's great. We do not deliver such innovation at Cisco without just improving our skills, growing our skills on an everyday basis. And I know you're setting the bar pretty high. I'm curious about all the things and technology you've been discovering on the way. Are there any specific just developer tools, platform that you really use a lot, you're currently very enthusiastic about?
I've tried my best to learn, different kind of programming languages and work in multiple environments up through the years, ranging from, the really low-level C++ environments to, like we just saw, JavaScript environments. And as I've grown more mature, I've come to realize that it's not really that much about the programming language itself or the environment. It's the tools that you use to work in these environments. So I don't know if it makes me hardcore or, like I said, almost like a old fart, but I turn to Emacs as my one weapon of choice, because to me it's the editor that for the last few years have been sort of instrumental to all the stuff that I've pretty much delivered on a coding level and also on multiple other levels. So I know there's a bunch of new cool editors out there. There are, all these people evangelizing about Vim being awesome. I actually was a Vim user for more than 10 years when I came out of my studies, and it was only for 3 or 4 years ago when I saw some YouTube videos about the possibilities with Emacs. I already knew about how powerful of an editor it is, but over the last few years, I've pretty much started living in it. You have your email, you have your notes, you have all the programming environments, and you get all the niceties of proper error checking. And so it might be kind of a boring answer, but Emacs provides the possibility for me to pull together all the amazing tools that the development communities provide, like error checking and linting, static analysis. All of these things are very important to me and how I do my work. So I would say that it's not really revolutionary, but it's definitely important to me. So I don't know. Do you think it's a boring answer?
No. I like the fact that every developer chooses his tool that is the most fluent with and productive, and we've got a pretty huge community, open source community that is very creative in the industry. And I was wondering, is there something lately that showed up in the industry? You're a JavaScript addict, and I try to follow trends, but I'm not like you focused 100% of my time on JavaScript, and the trends in the industry. Have you seen something coming that was like pretty impressive and you say, yeah, that's interesting, guys, for me as a testimonial, for you, Martin, that you'd like to share with the group?
Yeah, so if you follow the JavaScript ecosystem, I don't really think that it's a surprise, but the introduction of these technologies you build on top of JavaScript, for a long time, the inconsistencies between all the browsers and the environments led to tools like Babel, the transpiler back in the day, where you could use all the new awesome features running on the old JavaScript environment. So we actually use that also in the macro framework to be able to, because the runtime that we provide only supports ECMAScript 5.1 and some additional new features. Yeah, so that was a big turning point when we sort of realized that, JavaScript is actually the assembly for the web, and that was long before actually the WebAssembly part. So moving on from there, you started to see Facebook introducing Flow and Microsoft with TypeScript. So I would definitely say that once I got into TypeScript, I'm also already a pretty big fan of functional programming, strongly typed languages, programming theory, and all these kind of things. So to make my JavaScript, which originally has been seen as a playful language almost, it's not by many aspects considered a pure, amazing C++ like programming language. It's a script kiddies kind of playful. You make moving boxes on a web page. How can that be fun? But when you actually start to throw TypeScript into the mix and all these amazing linting tools, you get this really mature developing experience, and you combine this with the browsers and their debugging abilities, and also the fact that I don't know if people actually think about this, but JavaScript is actually the only language that you can guarantee runs on almost any device out there. Like your grandmother, your child, everybody has a JavaScript interpreter, on their phone, right? So in here, in the browser, you can actually run the code that you write without any compilation. You just ship it to somebody over the internet, and then they can run it. So I think the JavaScript environment is still really interesting, and it's going to be for a long time. So I think it's hard not to acknowledge the power of JavaScript and never underestimate, how actually valuable a language it is.
Yeah, definitely. I love that, and we're seeing more and more groups at Cisco adopting JavaScript for extensibility. The IoT group now has a runtime, so that when you have an IoT device, you can now ship also extensibility in JavaScript. So that, and we know also that the Webex team has got a lot of SDKs. So yeah, it's a skill you can leverage and extend Cisco products all on the way. So I'm with you. It's, of course, there's a learning curve with every language, but once you get there, you're there, and then you've got this superpower. You've got these superpowers, but what do you think there's still some gaps that you see like already obvious, important in the industry that you would love the industry to solve at some point? Some challenges you keep facing around and around. I know you're interacting with a lot of teams and different technologies and also challenges with devices because of requirements and resources, technical resources on the device itself. So any aspiration, any hope for the community to come up with some gaps and solve some issues you're having?
Yeah, so I think it's important to be mindful of the times that we live in, and that people are working increasingly from home, from remote locations. They need to make sure that their projects can be developed on any, or maybe not any platform, but pretty much every computer. You have to take your development setup and move it to a different machine. You have to move all these tools around, and you come back and you want your projects to work, even though you haven't been working on it for a while. So one of the things I've been really conscious about for the last maybe year or so is the ability to make your development environments and your production environments reproducible, so that you could basically take whatever source code you have, and then you're guaranteed to have a working environment wherever you bring it. So if you take your code with you, you know that you can still run it, you can run the tests, you can deploy it to production, you can build the software. I think that's something we still underestimate quite a bit. So there are, with the containers and Docker and these kind of things have already been very popular for a while, but still we lack the sort of enumeration of all the inputs that goes into a build. Basically, you need to know that you cannot depend on system packages, on Node versions or GCC versions. All of this you have to have control of down to the finest grain. So with that in mind, I started looking more into this really interesting build system and packaging manager, if you like, called Nix. So it's basically backed by this lazy, purely functional programming language, which builds all these packages. And then their tagline or their goal is to be able to have reproducible builds in all aspects, basically. So the whole part of the tool chain is pretty much a part of what actually ends up as the ending result. So not just the Node version, but also whichever GCC version went into building that version of Node, and then you basically have the bootstrap process all the way from the first binary that you ever had. So I think that's really interesting. So I've been actually running NixOS, which is a Linux distribution running on top of this for over a year now, and it's always me who breaks the build, of all the other people, because on my system, I don't necessarily have a /bin bash. I have it's somewhere else on the system because it has to be that version of bash. So it's really nice to just take any project and try to build it on Nix. And if it doesn't build, it means that somebody has forgot to, introduce one of the dependencies properly. So yeah, I think I'm not saying that Nix is the perfect solution, but it's on the way. I think this is where we have to move with software in the future, to be able to make sure that software always runs, it's always buildable, and you can always go back and fix broken software.
Got it. Wow. Thanks for sharing these thoughts. And now I'm going to go and give a look at this Nix package manager and tools. So yeah. So thanks for all the work you're doing behind the scene, Martin. And you help us and you help Cisco deliver this awesome runtime, and we now see how much work it's behind the scenes. So please keep doing the hard work so that it pleases our DevNet community. And I just got your word. Never underestimate the power of JavaScript. It's very near you. Keep the fun and keep it going, and see you soon on the internet.
Thanks.
Or in the team space.
Thanks a lot, Stève. It's been a great pleasure talking to you.
Hi, and welcome to Straight from Cisco Engineering. I'm with Cory. Cory is the product architect on the Meraki Engineering team. And please introduce yourself, Cory.
Hi there. So I'm Cory. I've been with Meraki for quite some time. I started off as one of the early support guys almost 10 years ago. And I've progressed through to sales engineering, service provider support, API focus around solutions. And right now I pretty much just live, eat, drink APIs all day, and happy to talk about anything that we're doing here over at the engineering side in Meraki.
Okay, thanks for being here. So 10 years at Cisco, and I know you're passionate with technology. You've worked on many projects, launches, critical ones, but also fun things. We met at the developer conferences, external events, where you were assembling demos. So you've done many things around those years. I was wondering what would be some of your biggest achievements, some things you're already proud of along the years, and what you remember from that time you've been spending at Cisco.
Yeah, great question. So it's there was a path that I almost had to carve for myself as I was going through the different roles within Meraki. And as I got to start working with a lot of service provider engineers or service providers, large enterprises, it became a little bit challenging to take just a dashboard or graphical interface that is powerful, but to also translate that to something that these other entities could, make use of using their own tools. And so between myself, a couple other systems engineers, some support guys, we kind of formed our own guerrilla API team within Meraki. And this is before we had a recognized API product. We got really engaged in the whole concepts. We started going to a lot of the initial DevNet events. We started, building these little one-off solutions, playing with APIs. And out of all of that experience, there was actually a shift where everybody really started to embrace this concept of programmability. And there was a giant reshuffle within the Meraki product management side. They actually defined a cloud product management group and an API product team within inside of that, of which I'm a part of. And now we actually have, a dedicated group of engineers on the Meraki side, as well as a product team. We have marketing, and we have engagement with our ecosystem, as well as we're a huge contributor to DevNet. And what I'm proud of is that we were able to do this kind of from the ground up. And then we were able to build in things like the open API specification for our public facing view of our API, but as well as we were able to develop internal frameworks. So it enabled all of the API development to go, much easier throughout Meraki. And I guess I'm just happy that we just now released API version 1. It's the first major release of the API. Previously, it was mostly organic. And that was through a lot of hard work over the past couple of years, and now it's official. So I would say that's what I'm most proud of, and I'm more excited to build all sorts of great solutions on top of our hard work.
And thanks for this hard work. When I started at Cisco, I looked at the Meraki APIs, and that was really beautiful because those webhooks, events, notifications you would get in real time with locations aware applications, and so much you can also automate, turning on and off your Wi-Fi and creating custom applications for your own family and home use. So that's all thanks to you guys. And I was like, who is that team building these products? And then I met you at an event, and I discovered that you had coding skills too. And that's certainly something interesting when you work on the product management side and see APIs. And how do you see the real strength of this both product management and coding skills you have all together?
Yeah, I would say I just have some experience, and it gives you perspective on the types of things that you ask and expect out of engineering, as well as what you can promise to customers and the likes. Like a lot of us, I took some programming in college. It was like Java, some basic, some other random things. And then I went on to, managing Microsoft servers and a GUI, and I kind of forgot all about that. And then fast forward a couple of years, and now programming has become kind of all the rage again. And what's helpful is that I got to relearn a lot of this stuff, new languages, but the concepts are pretty much the same. It's variables, it's loops, it's functions. And once you understand that, it just helps you to translate customer requirements or general feature asks in a much clearer way that engineering appreciates, because they can actually assign realistic hours to specific tasks and epics and stories and all of that, as well as it helps to articulate good questions to the customers or partners to solicit feedback that's constructive, as opposed to, I just wish you had everything. And that doesn't really help. But if you specifically ask, would it be helpful if we returned an array or an object of this data to give you more or less information? It's those sorts of questions that, again, help us to be more efficient as we communicate these desires to our engineering team.
Yeah, and that also surfaces, I think, all your work when we look at your open API definitions you're publishing, just all the little care you've put in there so that you can automate also behind the scene, and that needs a lot of course, technical skills to understand what are the implications of really providing an end-to-end open API specification, very functional.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and there was a certain thing we had to understand. So a lot of the API capabilities within our platform, you know, were developed by various engineers across our products. And it was our job as the API team to really consolidate all of those, that stream of development to the platform in a continuous way. And then we could effectively take snapshots of the platform and assign a release version to that. And by doing that, it gives us a sense of, we're all looking at the same source of truth of information, allowing us to spin off documentation and SDKs and Postman collections, in a really sensible way that we know we're all working with the same data. Now, to make that happen, again, we had to implement some form of a standard, and we've implemented OpenAPI, and that gives us a JSON payload. It basically describes the API via an API. And we just take that JSON, we put it up in GitHub, and then from there we can spin off these CI/CD processes, whether it be Jenkins or Ansible or GitHub Lab or GitHub Actions. There's a number of tools you can do, but really the concept is get the data somewhere, and then you have scripts that can basically run APIs to generate a changelog or transform your collection. Ultimately, so you can do this as often as you need to, and ensuring that it's all consistent. And so it's almost as if it's like documentation as code, where now, because our source code is the specification, we can render all of this live interactive resources with little effort. There's only a few of us on the team, so we have to scale, smart.
Awesome. So thanks for all this care. And I'm always, whenever we meet or engage together, I'm always just like, what is Cory gonna show? Because I know you love IoT toys too, and assembling Lego stuff, and just to create an experience. So it's much more than a job for you. It's also a passion. And I'm wondering, I guess you're always looking at technology and learning new skills and looking for something exciting. And what is it you're currently fascinated from, or maybe you want to spend time on your weekends, night, whenever you got some time to spend?
Yeah, sadly, I spend my day hours and my evening hours thinking about APIs, but at least in my night time, I combine it with Lego, Internet of Things, sensors, Raspberry Pis. I allow myself to, kind of have fun, go into a rabbit's hole, trying to test out some new technology. One day I'm running MQTT, the next day I'm doing, Zigbee, and then how does BLE play into all this? And then once I understand all these technologies, I then try to, use the protocols and make them talk together. Sometimes it's just like a Rube Goldberg machine in my house where I have, a motion sensor, turn on a light, and then I have a Meraki camera that detects an object. And then if it detects it's likely me because it sees my Bluetooth, it might turn on the lights in a certain way or change the music to a different style. I just try to connect everything in the house. And with that, I learn a lot. But at the same time, I also experience all of the consumer challenges that, my Philips Hue system doesn't talk to my IKEA system, doesn't talk to whatever else. And thus you have like all of these different ecosystems and these different bridges. And I know that there is a better way. And I think, it's going to take some sense of, some standardizations within IoT in terms of security, the payload size, the general architectures. Not to say that there isn't, but there's too many standards, that there's not one standard, that it becomes a liability almost for new people to learn, because you stand up exposed services and don't realize the challenges there. And then naturally, you just want to just make efficient solutions. And so again, as I experiment with all of these things, I discover the challenges, and then I try to learn from that, whether it be poor documentation, so then I have a passion for writing docs, or it's just poor tooling, and thus I will either discover or write my own tools. Like if Postman wasn't solving my problem properly, I'll just write a plugin within Postman so I can do the things I want. It's basically using JavaScript in the background. And once you kind of learn how to hack a system, you can start injecting your own solutions off of the back of some other bigger platforms, which is kind of nice.
So thanks for all those details, Cory, and we really appreciate in the developer community all the passion you're putting in those APIs and also your work. So it was really nice speaking to you today. I don't want to take too much of your time. Please go back to our beautiful programmability and APIs, and see you soon in the team space and webinars and everything we provide at DevNet.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been my pleasure. I look forward to future conversations and all the great things we're going to be building together.